This is April, producer of Until Everyone is Free. Yesterday in town, our team and Qwani, which hosts Bunge la Mayut, together we hosted a teach-in on imperialism. It was called Beyond the Bill: Imperialism, Globalism, and the People's Resistance. Our panelists were Wacera Thande, Maureen Kasuku, and in lieu of Patrick Gadara, who was not able to make it because of a last-minute emergency, Booker Omole, who very generously filled in on short notice. The room was packed. People were sitting on the floor. Chairs kept being brought in. The energy was incredible. The questions were excellent. I won't say more since I introduced the session and our panelists in the following recording, but I will say, keep learning, keep sharing, keep looking out for one another, and keep fighting. We are just beginning, and it has been beautiful.
My name is April. I'm the producer of the podcast Until Everyone is Free, along with my teammate Stoneface, who's not here, with Warimu Gadimba, who was the one who organized this. So give her flowers when she's not moving around, as well as our moderator, Felix Omondi, who I'll introduce later. Thank you so much to our partners at Qwani. There's Keith here in the back. You can go there in the back and learn more about them. And of course, I will introduce our speakers later. But as we continue for a little bit to let people trickle in and to sort of frame this conversation, this discussion, as the brochure said, is going to be about imperialism. What is imperialism? How has it taken shape in Kenya? What does it mean? What does it do to people? All of these things. It can get theoretical, it can be abstract, but I wanted to sort of plant a seed of something concrete in your mind so that you have this in the back of your minds as you're listening to this conversation. Because when we're learning about imperialism, one of the big themes that will come of this is that all our struggles are connected, right? All our struggles are connected. And I think it's important to understand, and some of you might have seen our tweet about this earlier, that all struggles are connected is not just a cute metaphor. It's not just because it fits on an Instagram post and you can make it look nice. We don't just learn about imperialism so we can be better at parties or do panels. The revolution will not be done through webinars and panels alone. So why are we talking about this? All struggles are connected is not a cute slogan. It is actually how we win. It is actually our strategy to win. Now, what do I mean by that? So I'm going to take you on a bit of a journey. It might seem a bit roundabout at first, but I'm going to end it with a bunch of what-ifs, some hypothetical questions that might seem a bit too hypothetical to consider, but I want you to just sit with it for now. Sit with it throughout the rest of this session, and then if you want to pitokatao, then you can do whatever you want with those thoughts and you can forget them. But just try to take them seriously as we engage in this teach-in, as we engage in this workshop. By the way, for those who are just coming in, there are some seats up in the front, this whole row. Please feel free to, don't be shy. So I'm going to start with this. A major route for Congolese minerals, I'm talking about tin, I'm talking about gold, and of course the gold that has been mined during the conflict in Sudan. A major route for all of these minerals is through Sudan. Through the RSF itself. In fact, a lot of the RSF militiamen traditionally come from communities that plied this trade route. Gold, especially gold, ends up in the hands of capitalists in Israel and also the Emirates. Who is dispossessing the Maasai of their lands in Tanzania right now, in Ngorongoro, whether for luxury hunting, for luxury safaris, or for carbon credit programs? Where do African politicians do their wash-wash when they go into the Gulf? Number two, just like South Sudanese leaders looted their country dry, RSF soldiers are right now laundering their money in Nairobi as we speak, sometimes openly. Ask your Sudanese friends. Read about Ruto's relationship with Hemeti. Kenyan capitalism, yani, kills the poor in Kenya, but it also has always been a complicit endpoint for blood money that has been looted and exploited from our comrades in Congo, in South Sudan, and in Sudan. Number four, the 4 billion Kenyan shillings per year that medical workers were striking to be paid according to law. 4 billion Kenyan shillings a year. The government said, Serikali yetu imesota, we don't have that. I'm so sorry. Like, let's talk, let's negotiate. But 4 billion shillings per year were somehow found when it came to purchasing an air defense system from Israel. Not long after Ruto, and I'll say Ruto because it wasn't a democratic decision, but Ruto decided to sign up Kenya for a war against Yemen on behalf of whom? You guys are starting to see the shape. I'm basically carving out the negative shape of what we're going to talk about later, which is imperialism. So, and then on the day that the finance bill was signed in Kenyan parliament, there were 5 US Congress people, 5 of my House of Representatives sitting in parliament overseeing the bill's passage. You can look into that and you can ask why. Is this not the very imperialism that Palestinians have been teaching us about, have been fighting against, have been theorizing? And is this not, for example, the same imperialism that Burkinabés have been fighting against in West Africa? While we're in West Africa, what can West African defiance to French financial imperialism? Read about the CFA franc. If you don't know about it, you'll be shocked. What can that teach Kenyans about what the IMF and World Bank are doing in Kenya today, whether through the finance bill or other policies? What can we learn from our West African comrades, especially right now, exciting things happening in Burkina Faso, in Niger, and Chad, in that area? What can we learn from them? The Palestinians have fought and died for over 70 years against some of the strongest, most well-resourced, most violent imperial forces in the world. They have trained black militias, including the Black Panther Party from the US. There's a famous photo of Huey Newton from Oakland with PLO fighters. And the Palestinian resistance, in turn, was also supported by the Algerians, who fought off one of the few other settler colonies in Africa, besides Kenya and those in southern Africa. In Kenya and Palestine, of course, the settler colonialism in these 3 places is quite literally entwined. In some cases, quite literally the same guys. The police were moved from Palestine, where they developed Operation Shark in Tel Aviv. Operation Shark was the template for Operation Anvil that was used on the Mau Mau here. And of course, if Zionists had not rejected William Chamberlain's invitation in 1905, then Uasin today would be Israel. And if you don't know that story, then you can look it up. Look up the Uganda Plan. It was called the Uganda Plan, but it includes what is now currently Kenya. Now that we're talking about internationalism and socialist internationalism, Pio Gama Pinto, the subject of our podcast's first season, it was Pio Gama Pinto's socialist internationalism that got weapons routed from India through Mathare into the Aberdares, into Mount Kenya, where it supplemented the homemade weapons that Mau Mau used to fight the British here. What if Indians, only a few years after their own bloody partition, decided to focus on themselves first, to focus on developing, and didn't help the Mau Mau? Or what if, when Julius Nyerere and Kenneth Kaunda were looking for a railroad for Zambian copper that avoided Rhodesia, apartheid South Africa, and these other racist imperial regimes, and they were turned down by every single major lender in the world? What if at that time China, which in the late 60s was not yet rich, also decided to reject them, instead of doing what they actually did, which was send 20,000 workers to, alongside Tanzanian and Zambian laborers, build a very labor-intensive railway, which is, of course, the Tazara. Anyways, I can give examples forever, but the main takeaway is this. Our enemy, capital, which is the source of capitalism, and empire, which is the source of imperialism, they do not respect borders. Therefore, our resistance to these things also cannot respect borders. If we are fighting a little war in our one little territory, and capital and empire are traversing the world, we will never win. And so when I say, once again, all our struggles are connected, this is how we win. So I'm going to give some what-ifs. I just want to expand your imagination, think about what's possible. Everything that I'm going to say, actually some of these are reality. Everything here is done by ordinary people. This is something that can be done, and perhaps only can be done by ordinary people. There's not, I don't know, you don't have to be learned, you don't have to be elected, definitely don't have to be rich, definitely shouldn't be rich. This is the power. I just want to ask and think, how powerful would it be if Kenyans targeted Sudanese blood money investments in Nairobi and made it impossible for anyone to do their wash on the blood of our brothers and sisters in Sudan, here in Nairobi at least. They know they cannot do it because they'll always run up against resistance. Or what if Hong Kongers, after their fight over the anti-extradition bill, or the extradition bill in 2019, when they formed all of these independent trade unions, what if they advised Kenyans in this moment to do the same? Or what if fighting Israeli occupation through BDS, which is the nonviolent strategy of using boycott, divest, and sanction, which was, after all, an African invention. It was used first in South Africa. But what if fighting Israeli occupation in Kenya using BDS lit up the form, the shape of foreign capital in Kenya, and actually also taught us to prioritize local businesses and local supply chains rather than foreign and genocidal ones? What if, and this one is real, Kenyan mothers whose sons were extrajudicially executed here in Kenya sat in empathy, compassion, and solidarity with mothers in the favelas of Rio who undergo the same oppression of police violence over there? What if they learn from one another? And of course, this is happening, and if you want to know more about it, you can learn about the Madare Social Justice Center and their Mothers Network. Or what if South Koreans stopped Juno Motors from exporting those water trucks, I don't even know what they're called, those things, the orange-pink things, from coming to Kenya, in the same way that volunteer groups like Palestine Action in the UK have made it almost impossible for the Israeli weapons manufacturer Elbit Systems to operate in the UK, simply by trespassing their facilities, sometimes vandalizing, sometimes breaking key parts, sometimes occupying. They have shut down one weapons facility after another in the UK and have shrunk the footprint of this company that quite literally makes the weapons that then obliterate the bodies of people in Gaza. What if we all did this for Sudan? What if we all did this for Congo? What if we all did this for Haiti? What if dock workers and transport workers all around the world were so in solidarity and so conscious that it became impossible to move weapons from one place to another? What if Kenyan politicians actually dreaded traveling and eating per diems because they knew that whatever country they were in, people would be in so much solidarity with the protesters at home that they would get booed, that they would get things thrown on them. In the UK, they like to throw milkshakes, I don't know, in the US, eggs, whatever local products. What if that was the case? Because everyone was so in solidarity, because everyone understood our struggles are connected. These what-ifs are still what-ifs only because not enough people know that all our struggles are connected. And here is the good thing. Even though these things seem quite, it's like, oh, well, what if? Yeah, that would be nice, but it's never going to happen. The only thing, though, that stands between someone not knowing this and understanding this is learning. And that is precisely what we're here to do today at this teach-in. This learning has nothing to do with being learned. It's nothing to do with formal education. And of course, the most powerful people's movements in the world and history have been made up by people with no formal education. So this is why we're here today, for political education. Civic education is there. It's important. I think it's important for people to understand how to recall MPs and MCAs and figure out the system. But civic education will only teach you how to be an effective and good citizen within your own country, within the political system that currently exists, or to whatever extent it can be reformed. Political education is how we get free. Political education is what teaches us how to do everything that I've just been saying right now. And this is something that spreads, on one-on-one conversations. It can be done through projects like our podcast, which was a almost, completely volunteer-run thing and is free. This is an everyday thing that everyday people, that ordinary people do. It's nothing that you will learn in a program. And so once we stop thinking that there is, some kind of the perfect leader that we're waiting for, the Messiah or whatever. Once we understand that all of these things that I've named can only be done with ordinary people, actually, Once you realize that actually all we have is one another, and yet that is the only thing that can be powerful enough to win, then we're starting to win. And so I'll leave us with this last note before introducing our esteemed panelists today, which is that the only tool that is powerful enough to overcome global capitalist imperialism is global worker solidarity. And that's why the famous slogan goes, "Workers of the world unite." And that's why you are all here, because I suspect that you already have some inkling of this, otherwise you probably wouldn't be here with us today. You probably would have just figured that, it's enough. Now the CS, whatever, they're gone, and so we've won. No, there's still much more work to be done, and that's why we're here. So I'm going to one by one call our panelists forward today. I'm going to start with Wacera Thande. Wacera she is... Wacera is not a strange face to most of you, mostly because she's been on the big screen recently, on the big TV, speaking not on behalf of the movement, but really telling people and impressing people in a way that I appreciate what the movement is about and what it's not about. She is a community-based development researcher and social worker, and as such, she's worked in both formal and community settings, collaborating with local governments, healthcare, social care, student groups, academics, and grassroots organizations such as MSJC, Madari Social Justice Center, and through her podcast, the Ubunifu podcast, which I would recommend to all of you. She also hosted Mashujaa Mtaani, which commemorated forgotten Mau Mau freedom songs by recognizing the heroes we have around us today, Mtaani. So welcome, Sharon. Next, we have Maureen Kasuku, also Cask. Do we have her? Yes, we do. Okay. Maureen Kask is a cultural worker, a community organizer, and also a co-founder of Feminist Conversations Kenya. She's also written a lot of great pieces on a variety of left topics in the Kenyan context, including overcoming lesser evil politics in Kenya. Maybe this is a good time to revisit that. As well as feminist abolitionism in Kenya, Martha Karua and the politics of representation, state censure and Hasbara in Kenya, and many, many, many other topics. So this is Kask. Welcome. Next we have Comrade Booker Omole. Welcome. So Booker embodies socialist internationalism probably more than almost anyone else I know. I'm privileged to be on a part of his WhatsApp updates. And so when it comes to understanding what I've been saying, how all struggles are connected and making connections across borders, I really can't think of anyone better to talk about this than Booker. He's been a strong voice on this, from Palestine to Western Sahara to Haiti, to even militarism to agriculture, Latin America, Asia, Africa. He has thought about this, taught this, and above all, he's also the chairman of the Communist Party of Kenya, and also I'm a Bado national deputy. Tabuita chairman, anyways. Comrade. As well as a publisher, an amateur filmmaker, and a mechanical engineer. He also has the distinguished honor, I think, of having his former campaign videos, and yes, as an openly communist candidate, go viral. You should look up the music videos for this Sini Buka Junapea Kura. Karibuni. And then last, for our moderator, we have my esteemed teammate, Felix Omondi, who is many things, above all a self-described hood communist. As part of our podcast, he is a writer as well as a translator, and I would say as a translator of Sheng, you really have to be a poet to do that, and so it's good that he also happens to be a poet as well, and has been published in many, and has written beautiful things in Kenyan publications such as Downriver Road and many forthcoming. So I will hand over the mic to Felix, and what we'll do is go on for about an hour or so. I think we'll keep it, easy and flexible. We'll open up for questions at the end. So if you have questions, just write them down, think about them, remember them, and we'll go over them all at the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, April. Your introduction was really, really great. So tunaenda kwanza.
So we were supposed to have live streaming. However, we are missing one part. So what we're going to do is I'm recording this, and we will publish it on the podcast, and also Calotropis. Thank you so much, by the way, to Anthony Moiso in the back from Calotropis. Even though we didn't have the tech to do this thing, to do the live stream, they will still stream it later, not live. Dead stream, after stream. And then you guys can share and listen to that in different ways. So for now, there's no link, and if you have friends who are asking, tell them to just hold on tight, follow calotropis.xyz or the podcast handle, and they'll get updates on where to find the recording.
Thank you. So to begin with, April has given a really great introduction of what imperialism is and the different forms that imperialism has taken over the years. And so I'm going to try and start from the basics of these things, because when we were coming up with the idea for this teaching, we wanted to start from the basics for the person who is getting to learn about imperialism for the first time, or the person who went to the protest or saw an interview on TV and heard guys throw different words like capitalism and imperialism and wants to know what that means. So basically, imperialism is a system whereby another country takes over a territory or another country and tries to control it politically, socially, and also its economics. And over the years that we've known the country of Kenya as Kenya, imperialism has taken different forms. Initially, it started out with the Berlin Conference, when Europeans somewhere sat down and divided the whole continent and created a sphere of influence that later on came to be known as Kenya. And then after that, we also had instances of traders. First of all, before the colonialists came, we had guys who came as traders. Like Kenya, before Kenya was owned by the Imperial British East African Company. A company is what owned Kenya first before the British took over it. And after when the company was operating, they signed treaties with people on how to trade on different goods. And then later on, when colonization was starting to take shape, we have an instance whereby laws was one way by which imperialism was also taking shape, whereby we had things like the Crowd Ordinance Law of 1905 and 1915, which dispossessed so many people out of land. And after this land was dispossessed, we had the colonialists coming in and creating a sort of settler colony, whereby for most of the Africans who were dispossessed of this land, the only option that they had to survive was to work as wage laborers in what used to be their own farms. So slowly by slowly we see that taking shape, and Africans also starting to resist. And with each form of resistance, we start to see militarization, because over the years that Kenyans here and also Africans and other colonized people are trying to resist colonization, we see the military, the imperial powers use the military to try and quell the protests. So also military is one form by which imperialism globally has been trying to take shape. And after that, through the years of colonization, we see instances of religion coming in to try and pacify the people. Religion and education are one way that were used, the two ways that were used to try and pacify the people. So over the years, we've seen all this happen, and I've been throwing in words like imperialism and colonization and capitalism together. My panelists are going to help us to try and break down what that means exactly. But one time around 1963, our grandfathers who were there and grandmothers who were there woke up one morning and told we got independence. And before independence happened, we had a series of meetings. I know there's the Lancaster Conference, whereby guys at some place in Europe wrote up a constitution, wrote up how this new country would look like. And one morning we were told that we are now an independent country. But years later, guys came to realize that we are still not independent. And I think Oginga Odinga wrote that book that says, "Not yet Uhuru," right? And over the past 2 weeks, guys have been on the streets trying to shout and say, it's not yet Uhuru, we are still colonized. So what does that really mean? So on to my panelists, the first question I'd like to ask them is, over the past 2 weeks, we've had that discussion of guys saying that we are still not free, we're still not independent, that Kenya is a new colony. And Kwame Nkrumah has a book that is titled, Imperialism, Neocolonialism is the last stage of imperialism, right? But what does he mean by that, by him saying colonialism is the last stage of imperialism, and what does it mean when we say that Kenya is still a neo-colony of the British? Yeah, who would like to go first?
Thank you. First and most importantly, I think it's important for us to remember all the over 49 comrades that were martyred in the streets in the last, 2 or so weeks that the criminal gangs have been on the streets. So at this moment, I think the people were murdered by the police, the people were murdered by the state violence and government militia. It's important that we recognize them and to remind ourselves that we will never let our descendants forget about them, because they have paid the ultimate price. The second thing is and this is also important, maybe before I go to the neo-colonial project, at any given time of the struggle, there are always a section of the people in the struggle that are willing to negotiate with the oppressor, and there's always another section of the people that want to complete the oppressor. That differentiates between revolutionaries, reformists, narrow nationalists, and in that end. So what it basically happened in that during the fight for our independence, there were different sections, just like now we are in the streets fighting. But some backward individuals who tell us, no, please don't go too far. You have to retreat because there is, the businessmen are losing money. So, we need not to push so much. They will tell us, no, we don't want Kenya to go like Sudan or Egypt after the spring. So they're telling the young people, come on, the president is already acting. So these people are not interested to change the status quo. Their main interest is to have only positions of influence and also to advance their interest. Some of them are very strange ideas that are being imposed upon the people in the streets by even foreign multinational interests, or even the people who try to bring a dialogue between the oppressed and the oppressed. It's like mixing water and fire and thinking you'll come up with a nice cocktail called fire water. One of them has to go. So what happened during independence is there was the peasant movement that was led by Field Marshal Dedan Kimathi. And for them, it was not a question of negotiating with the oppressor, because the question was land. So that means if you want to negotiate with me, give me land and fuck off. That was the real issue. But also, there was another group of people that was led by narrow nationalists, that for them, land was not a question. It was an intellectual question. They were demanding for self-rule, but their demand for self-rule, they were just imagining themselves in the positions of the white man. This is why we say that Jomo Kenyatta, even though we say in many history books that you read, he was our founding father, but the guy was just a land grabber. Yeah. So I think most of us that went to parliament, when we were directing the rage of the people, because the role of the revolutionary when such an uprising also takes place is to direct the anger of the people to the symbols of oppression. One of the symbols of the oppression was the dead man lying in the public land who has stolen all our land. So some fire went up there, which is important also. So these two groups of people, one of them was able to negotiate with the British to preserve the British areas of privileges, including land in our country. And that is what came up to the Manchester Constitution. It was a negotiated independence, and for the very reason that they arrested Jomo Kenyatta, even though Jomo Kenyatta became very popular as an independent leader, why did they not hang Jomo Kenyatta but hang Dedan Kimathi? It's important to realize that the hardliners are killed before the negotiated independence. Joe Slovo in South Africa. And all other communists that were actually having non-negotiable terms were actually murdered on the eve of independence. For that reason, we always remember that Dedan Kimathi remains the hero and the uniting factor to complete our independence. Maybe when you walk in the streets, how is it possible that the CIA stooge, Tom Mboya, has a bigger statue than Dedan Kimathi? Because United States imperialism want to control the narrative. Even there are some people who does not understand that history that in the streets came up with some posters of Tom Mboya in the street. So how we got to inherit the colonial structures in our country and affirm the neo-colonial system was that the people that negotiated with the Imperial British to have our independence complete and actually demobilized the peasant movement, the land defense force that was actually popularly known as Mau Mau, these criminals are the people who took the state power. So the same colonial structures remained, but the faces changed. So we did not have now white minority privileges, but we had black minority privileges. So that historical context, I think, gives us what the neo-colonial system is at the moment. And it basically means that all the policies that have been implemented by the neo-colonial government in Kenya are not pro-people, but pro-capital or pro the imperialist interests. You know why now we say that President Ruto, we are not just speculating. Now we confirm that he's an imperialist puppet. Why? Because he talks as a Pan-Africanist, but acts as an imperialist puppet. And we can mention a few policies, I know most of you have seen. How is it possible to say that you want to create employment for young people like you through brokering their labor and exporting them abroad? That is a policy that is outlooking. He's basically running a slave trade, only that now in a civilized society. So that is imperialism by excellence. What are other policies? For example, when he brought out what he was calling the Hustler Fund, or free enterprising, that young people can employ themselves through petty trade in the street. That you can borrow 100 to 1,000 shillings to run your own businesses to succeed. That is neoliberal globalization by excellence. So his policies that he has rolled out are actually anti-people policies. He talks about the military intervention to actually advance the imperialist interest in the client country or the client state. How is it possible to explain that in less than 3 years, the President, William Samoei Ruto, has operationalized one of the biggest United States military bases in Wacera? That is basically to surrender our sovereignty. In fact, going to, Joe Biden entertained him in the White House like a small child. I think you people saw the photos. It was so humiliating, And then, after all, then Kenya was declared a non-NATO ally. Well, we know that the instrument of violence that continue to destabilize the entire planet is centered around NATO. So who did he consult? So we basically are saying that the neo-colonial government makes decisions not for the interest of the majority of the Kenyan people, but all the policies are outlooking. In fact, President Ruto is so weak that he cannot even repress us completely. So you need to form alliances of repression. Clearly, that's the kind of criminal we're dealing with. So imperialism, in actual sense, can be seen in several. Look at the way he talks about food security. Then you see, this guy wakes up in the morning and says that we can sort out food security through, let us say, GMOs. It's fair enough, we respect science. Secondly, says that Bill Gates can come here and sort our food security problems. Then he comes and says that, Coca-Cola is also here. He talks about all multinationals nonsense in our country. But how is it possible that you can talk about food security without dealing with the issue of land? Land is in the hands of hoarders. Land is in the hands of criminals. Land is in the hands of politicians that are corrupt. So to deal with the food security, let us expropriate land without compensation and turn out land to produce food to give people dignity. But what does the madman do? So every single policy that William Samoei Ruto has actually put through to the Kenyan people is targeting only to please his international cabals. It will not be anything that will change. Everybody who is looking for employment in this room, just be sure you won't get it. Because let me tell you, for people to be given employment, you have to start a deliberate process to put your country on a trajectory of industrialization. But he's killing industries. He's not putting money on the sugar sector. His brokers' friends are importing cheap sugar to sell to us. Total and Shell BP have actually taken over our refinery. We don't have a refinery anymore. So where will the engineers get jobs? So the actual thing is that the president of Kenya today is an imperialist puppet that only facilitates the neo-colonial project, and our duty as the young people and every person that is in this room is to complete our independence, to give every person, the Kenyan people, dignity. I can go on and speak for a long time about imperialism, but it's good I think I stop and give it to my esteemed panelists.
Viva Comrade, viva! Yeah, thank you so much, Booker, for starting us on a really high note. And yes, fellow Kenya hatujaipata uhuru, not yet uhuru. We are still living under neo-colonialism, which is just colonialism 2.0. That's why we always see our presidents every election year, lazima wa report to their masters in the UK, lazima waende Chatham House kuambia speech yao before akuja watuambie sisi, what can I do for you, Masa? What can I do for you today? Lazima waende huko, lazima waende UK kwanza, lazima wapate approval ya US before wapate I don't know how the rest of you feel about elections, but I don't know, like in Kenya it seems very ritualistic kukunja karatasi kuingiza kwa box alafu unaambua hiyo ni democracy. So tumeambiwa tusiende kwa streets, tusiharibu nchi yetu because we are a democracy. But hii democracy yetu watu wengi like 70% of the population is under the age of 35. Hatuna kazi, ndo maana tuko street, na tunaweza kwa street ila siku, Monday to Friday, wasione hiyo Tuesday na Thursday ni nyingi. So tunaweza kwa street kila siku juu. Ametwekea, venye mtu alisema ametwekea the curse of unemployment. So what are we supposed to do? We've been told that we live in a sovereign state, and we gained our independence in 1963. But as Booker ametuonyesha, like there were a lot of boardroom deals, the Lancaster House and stuff like that. So we are still living under a neo-colony, and Booker has touched on food sovereignty and the importance of land. The puppet we have as the imperialist puppet we have as a president, William Ruto, he's really interested in carbon credits, and we know carbon credits is a sham. Carbon credits is a way for, as April had mentioned, the UAE to come and grab like hordes of land here and leave our people landless, so that they can have an open. So they can have like free, an open check to ruin our planet, right? So Kenya bado not yet uhuru. We are a neo-colonial state in so many ways, and I really hate how they sold us this Kenyan exceptionalism. Tumeambiwa sisi ni a NATO ally. They have military bases in Kenya. We are making enemies with our neighbors. Ruto, he likes to tout himself as a Pan-Africanist, and but here he is sending our killer cops to Haiti, the first black country kupata independence in 1804, and they have brought wamejionea shida sana na the US, na the UK, and all these Western powers. So how are you a Pan-Africanist when you are sending your killer cops to kill other Africans on behalf of the imperialists? How are you a Pan-Africanist? So again, pia mimi naeza go on and on and on, but like those are the examples I can point out of the way Kenya is being used as a vassal state. We have military presence in Nanyuki, we have military presence in Lamu, and those who have been to Manda Bay, the area around Manda Bay, you know how the people, the indigenous people of their land, wanaishi kama prisoners in their own home because of the US military base in Manda Bay, and we are being told that it's a good thing that you're a NATO ally or something, and that we should feel exceptional from other African countries because our puppet went to the US and alikalishwa chini kwa kiti akazungushwa na akapiga picha. So yeah, smile and wave. So yeah, not yet Uhuru.
I think I'll just give a definition of what neocolonialism is for those people who don't know. So I've just Googled it, because Google is your friend. So neocolonialism is the use of economic, political, cultural, or other pressures to control or influence other countries, especially former dependencies. For you guys who know your history, you are a former colony of the UK. And the dependency bit is actually something we really need to understand, because the UK is dependent on us. All the imperialist powers are dependent on us, former colonies. That's just the reality. So, one thing, let me just say one thing before I give you the mic. So, when we talk about development, so the economic and, I guess, infrastructural development of a country, we think about the UN, we think about Oxfam, we think about all of these INGOs. But one of my favorite definitions of development is from a man called Walter Rodney. He defines development as self-sustaining growth. With that definition, nowhere in the world is developed. Because what is France without West Africa? What is the UK without East Africa, India, basically the 95% of the world? What is the Netherlands without Indonesia? Like, these are genuine questions we need to ask ourselves. So when we say Kenya is a new colonial state, that is what we mean. Our policies, our our culture and our economy is heavily influenced by the imperialists. So that is what we have all said. Not yet Uhuru. Yeah.
Thank you. I love the way you say that the imperialists depend on us. Like France, ever since the coups in West Africa has been happening, they tried as much as possible to get a hold of those countries. And the guys are still not refusing, because they knew that if they lose a hold of the countries in West Africa, then France cannot survive. Because we know even with it's franc, April said it's franc out. The CFA, the currency that they have, with the reserves sitting in the French National Bank, which the French can be able to do with it whatever they want. They know that if they lose that, then already they start losing the economic power. But also back here at home, all of us have agreed that Ruto is a puppet of the West, and that Kenya is a neo-colonial state. But why hasn't Kenya never broken ties with these imperialists? What is it for our political elites that over the years, we've been independent for 60 plus years, we've had different governments come into place, but none of them has ever tried to break ties with these guys? Why is that? What do they get to gain out of that? Yeah.
That's I think the best answer is to see how our politicians move in Nairobi. You've seen the way they drive those big ass cars that they buy with our taxpayer money. You've seen the way they go. Yeah, like, what's his name? Former CS Mokomen, thank God we can say that. See, this guy was found, that's a win, but we have to keep going. But this guy was found, was it last week, I don't know, in Dubai with bags of money. money that's come from us. Yeah, at how much? 226 million. Please, someone here tell me if you've ever seen that amount of money, because me, I've never. Yeah. So like, the one thing I will say is that is what they gain. They gain economic empowerment. They gain the flashy houses. Those are 100, 800 million houses they buy in Karen, in Runda, wherever. Those islands that they buy. Okay, I don't think they buy off islands. They probably do, but that is what they stand to gain. And this is why I think it's very important for all of us right now, especially when we are talking about the finance bill. You need to have a class analysis. You need to understand how does capital influence the way we interact with one another. My reality and your reality is very different economically, but it messes us up. It affects us all differently. So what they stand to gain is economic prowess. Just the same way the Wazungus would go and live in the highlands in those nice, beautiful houses. Okay, I don't think they're beautiful because honestly, like the architecture is outside. But they have African servants. They have access to all of this land. They have access to food, things that give you dignity, things that we had for free, man. Like in African culture, whenever we used to sell food, you walk to a tree, you get a fruit, and you eat it. It's free because nature gives freely. But then you have these guys who come and say, okay, I'm going to hold on to this and turn it into capital. So what they have to gain is capital and oppressing other people in the process.
Yes, capitalism, please. It's all about capitalism. Hoarding wealth, kununua manyumba in the Swiss Alps, kupeleka watoto wao to European schools, kutibiwa homa Nairobi Hospital, lakini unaenda kutibiwa cancer uko Bristol Hospital in the UK, and hautaki kulipa interns. And yeah, cash rules everything around me. Sini dollar bill. You're like, yeah. So the end goal here is capitalism, and also I feel like na wanaogopa pia. Like history metuonyesha any African leader who has tried to stand up for the people, what happens to them, right? From Thomas Sankara, all our great ancestors, our great leaders. So when we have military bases here in Kenya, or we have military bases across the global south, it's for the West to tell them, okay, you can have your little playground, but Uncle Sam is always watching. You have to do what we tell you to do, and if you don't, Mandabe haiko mbali. We'll deal with you, vizuri. So this is why we should be against having military bases on our continent and across the global south. But look at what Ruto has opened us to. Now we are beefing with, the Houthis in Yemen, and now we are lecturing Putin about Ukraine. Na hatuna nguvu, hatuna uwezo. And this is what Ruto has set us up for. And Uncle Sam knows this. He knows he can, dangle his little trinkets on our leaders, just as the sellouts kitambo waliuza watu wao for blankets and salt. Squeezy watu wanatuuza for Range Rovers and mansions. And then in exchange, sell your people, have military bases in your country. And ukitry anything, Uncle Sam is always watching. So it's capitalism, and pia wanajua trap wenye wameingia wako kuna shida nyingi na ni mimi ndo nimejiletea, or rather ni mimi nimeletea watu wangu. So yeah, capitalism, and also just looking back into history, how anyone who tried to defy the West alikufa. But this is 2024. We're not gonna go down without a fight.
Yeah, maybe my observation on his question that how is it possible that these people who mismanages our affairs have been able to stay much longer in power, and we still remain a neo-colonial project several years after, if I'm to reframe his questions. But maybe the struggle continues, but not in a straight line. It moves in layers, and sometimes there are many successes, sometimes there are many defeats. For example, in my lifetime, I didn't know I will have 2 weeks of, revolutionary energy in the streets. So I didn't know that in my lifetime I will be able to observe what I've committed my entire life in. But, in 2 weeks, it was total complete to debunk what they call the powerful in our country. In fact, it was an empirical confirmation that all power belongs to the people and nowhere else. The second part is that the struggle since independence, Kenya has a long history of struggle, and we have many martyrs in this struggle. At any given time, the Kenyan people have not been hesitant to donate their lives, their total life, to actually bring dignity to the Kenyan people. So the young people today are building on the suffering of many people that also came before them. It's important for us to acknowledge that, because when you are advancing a given project, it's like a relay. You have to hand it over to some people, and it moves in that consequence. For example, the biggest struggle we had that many of our patriots lost their life was indeed the struggle for independence, the fight against the settler colonialism, the white settler colonialism of the minority. So in that sense, many patriots lost their lives, some were hanged. Even today, we are still questioning this criminal system that is dominating us. Where did they bury Dedan Kimathi? Why are they not showing us? Because they think that will inspire us to overthrow them? Even the fact that we don't know where he was buried is already annoying us enough. The second was the fight against the autocratic rule of dictator Moi, one Kanu system. Again, we have many of your grandparents, many of your parents that were actually locked up in waterboarding, and they were tortured. And this went on for more than 24 years, this killing. Only after that, then the so-called democracy that was introduced to us by really the Western caricature of democracy, because we learned from Lenin that democracy is a dictatorship of sort. Because you cannot say we live in a democracy while the people who can vie successfully to win political seats are only the rich people. So this is a board of directors for the rich people to actually manage the affairs of our country only for the interest of the rich minority. So again, the fight for democracy that we fought for in Western spheres is only talk. Just like freedom is also talk. Now all of you, according to the Constitution, you are free to travel everywhere and own land. But the very basic of it, without money, that freedom, it cannot be implemented. You are free to access education in the best of your knowledge. But without money, the truth of the matter is that you will remain totally illiterate. So all these freedoms and democracies that we are being talked about, they are all platitudes in the mind and not happens in our objective or our material life. Now, in the essence that the removal of dictator Moi in 2002 through a popular vote, people again realized that no, it was not this just criminal. It was the constitution. So again, there was an emergence for fight for constitution. And you see, like there was one that was killed during the constitutional amendment. We saw some of his photos in the streets, trying to remind the Kenyan people that people have martyred in the streets fighting for this open, democratic, and civil space. So my point was that we are progressing well, but now we are at a point that we have to intensify the struggle to finish the job. In fact, the young people are scared saying to finish Kumalo. So we have to finish, and to finish is that we cannot compromise with criminals. We cannot compromise with capital. Labor has to overrule, and all the wealth is produced by our own hands. So the people who want to manage that wealth only for their behalf, we must. Today, Ruto has fired his own government, so he has to fire himself. Yeah, because, yeah. That is the truth of the matter. You cannot tell me that you are a CEO, now you've fired your accountant, you've fired everybody else, but when it comes to firing you, that's when you draw the line. So, and also there is a new consciousness in the streets because people now can relate our domestic struggle and the international struggle. The role of IMF and World Bank is becoming clearer. Remember in 1990s when in 1990s when our grandparents, our parents went through the toughest times when IMF and World Bank introduced what we call at that time structural adjustment. What did they understand? They only knew that there was a golden handshake and you were told take 40,000 and go home and die. But now people are saying, oh, now we understand why most of industries after the re-entrance of IMF closed in 1990s. Now we know why there was a lot of retrenchment in 1990s, but we will not allow that to happen under our watch now, especially when we elected you on some promises, but now you don't implement them. So I think the struggle to complete our independence, because for us we are saying that this current struggle that we are having here in Kenya, we want the decision for the Kenyans to be made by Kenyans, not foreigners. And we will want to start a national project that gives the dignity for the majority of the Kenyan people, and President Ruto is not one of the people who can lead that project.
So another thing I'd also say is like it's very important for us to learn and study. So one of the books I like reading, I usually call myself a Fanonite, so Frantz Fanon. And there's this book called Wretched of the Earth, and one of the highlights that I've done is he says, on the contrary, we must persuade ourselves that colonialism is incapable of procuring for colonized people the material conditions likely to make them forget their quest for dignity. That is why, year in, year out, from the Kenya Land and Freedom Army to even before that, there was Mekatilili, there was a bunch of other freedom fighters. It's continued on for, I think every 20 years there's like an uprising. Because we know, we feel it, we can see it, that colonialism can never meet our material conditions for dignity. Because colonialism does not see you as a dignified human being. It does not recognize your humanity. It doesn't know what Ubuntu is. It doesn't know that your black skin means that you're a human being who was brought into this earth to do something. So we need to make it very clear, absolutely clear in our minds, that it has no role to give us the dignity that we need. And that is why we need to dismantle these systems. Yes, we can celebrate that the CSs were futwad, but the reality is what Booker was saying. It's a corrupt system. It needs to come down. We need to realize it's not there for us. It won't serve us. It won't serve our children. Yeah.
Can I make one comment on the Wretched of the Earth? No, she's mentioned a very interesting book. And also it comes to what was happening in the street of Frantz Fanon. In fact, that book talks about the role of revolutionary violence. And every time you see the pacification that you're going to confront an armed, lethal, organized state violence with non-violence is a recipe for a massacre. In fact, even though there is a debate that there were some organized criminals that threw stones at the police during the violence, the truth of the matter that any time we advances in the street, we have to meet the police violence. For us to move the barrier from, let us say, GPO to take it to Nyayo, there has to be violence. Because the police, first of all, started firing tear gas cannons, then rubber bullets, then they started to fire live bullets. And anytime we moved, there was some violence to be meted against the police violence. So the reason why we reached actually Parliament was that we are able to measure up the violence. Every time we pushed them, it was some violence. So that book is an exclusive book for all comrades to read, that the whole issue of non-violence is not absolute. Because there was also another struggle against the colonial Britain of Kinjeketile rebellion. They were fighting the white violence with some water, some witchcraft, yes, spiritual water. And they were massacred in rows. Yeah, so that's what I wanted to clarify on the quote, please.
Let me finish the quote. So it says, once colonialism has understood where its social reform tactics would lead it, back come to the old reflexes of adding police reinforcements, dispatching troops, after we're called to treason as criminals, and establishing a regime of terror better suited to its interests and its psychology. So I hope it is abundantly clear that the colonial project is insane. These people are criminals, they are treacherous, what we were being called, and, and they establish a regime of terror. Yes.
I love that all of you have given us like a timeline of over the years we've been having struggles, right? We had struggles from 1900 to the 50s to the 90s, right now still having struggles. But in the 80s and 90s, we had struggles against Moi, and oftentimes it's usually framed like people are fighting against the one-party dictatorship of Moi, but basically people are fighting for more than that, right? I know people are fighting against imperialism in the 80s and the 90s, because recently on a Twitter chat we were talking about guys in places like Madari were fighting for land. That was not a fight against Moi himself, but they were fighting against trying to own their land. Or the women in, I think, Maragua, who when the IMF in the 80s was telling the Kenyan government to try and pay the loans that they had to plant more coffee and sell more coffee to Britain to get more money to pay our debt. And the women said, we don't need coffee, we need food. And these women started uprooting the coffee farms and started planting food. That was also a struggle against imperialism, right? And these past 2 weeks, this whole past last month and this new month that we started, guys have been on a struggle. And oftentimes guys are saying things like IMF and the World Bank, right? They're saying that the finance bill that all of us are saying we don't want, but our political class are saying they want it, was written by the IMF. But how did the IMF get here, first of all? Because the IMF initially, the World Bank and the IMF were formed as agencies to try and repair the economies of Europe after the World Wars II, right? But how do they find themselves in Africa and other countries? And what role do they play? And what is it that exactly they did to Kenya in the 80s and the 90s that most of us may not know that they're trying to do to us right now? Could we speak about that?
It's important to also mention that without economic independence, there is no sovereignty. So we can talk about having some black faces leading us, but without taking charge of our economy and building it by implementing policies that are people-centric, we still remain colonized. We still remain vulnerable. So what IMF has done in World Bank is to make sure that the countries of the global south remains in complete economic disarray. Because they use carrot and stick policies where I will give you loans, but I put conditionalities. So it basically means that I give you certain loans, then I actually disburse these loans in bits as long as you're complying with my conditionalities. So the first thing is that less state, more business. In the sense that the government has no role in running the economy, but to surrender the entire economy to some private greedy businessmen abroad. So it basically means that you do not develop your productive forces as the countries of the global south, and you remain economically dependent to the countries of the global north or the developed countries. So when we produce tea, we produce coffee, but tea and coffee lands in the companies in the global north to process them and return them back to us. So it as finished products. So it basically means that the policies and the conditionalities by IMF has helped reduce Kenya only to an exporter of cheap raw materials and organize us into labor camps. Look at the Dutch companies that are doing flowers in Naivasha, for example. The people that are working in the flower farm, some of them even do not know what flowers are being used for. They think it is being eaten in Europe. The second part of it is that these entire Dutch companies that left Netherlands, they could not even use some of the chemicals they are using in this country in their own countries. So they use difficult chemicals to kill our people. So the other thing is that now we have the economic processing zones here, the AGOA product of the Barack Obamas. I think all of you probably knows it. These are organized modern day labor camps. In fact, modern day slavery camps, I may call them. You have hundreds of thousands of Kenyans that every day go to economic processing zones. What are they going to do? Within the economic processing zone, all the labor rights have been suspended. So it basically means there is no debate about living wage. Minimum wage is not even there. Now, instead of President Ruto giving, for example, subsidies for electricity for the poor people, he gives subsidies to multinationals in economic processing zone. They give subsidies for water in economic processing zone. In fact, he gives 10 tax holiday for 10 years for these people who are robbing our country. So it basically means that the conditionalities that are being put through are not just to stagnate our economy, but also to make us always answerable to the dominance powers of the West. So they use IMF and World Bank. For example, what about currency devaluation? Why do you want to force currency devaluation on a country that exports actually very little and imports more in the case of development? So that's why we are talking about the dollar hegemony. Some people probably say that, why did we welcome the Chinese capital in Africa? And then all these neoliberal NGOs will come here to tell us how China wants to recolonize Africa. But the truth of the matter is that all these neoliberal NGOs and the multinationals that have been operating in our country are jealous because Chinese capital is democratizing their access for finance capital. It basically means that instead of going to World Bank to tell you must do this, you can go to China, take the capital and do a road without having. So the role of IMF and World Bank is to actually stagnate our economies, and the soft power that is being led by the right-wing NGOs is more lethal than militias that we meet on the street. Because remember, if we go to informal settlements to have discussions, USAID is there, is paying the poor people 1,000 shillings to attend some rubbish meeting. And to tell them that last year there was a chess player here who shook hands with the king, and now you can do that. Some Hollywood prank. So indeed, I can summarize that the role of IMF and World Bank in the Global South has been able to force upon the policies that are anti-people, anti-development, and to make sure that most of the countries in the Global South remain answerable in terms of pillage to only benefit the dominant class of the West. And that is what Kenyans are saying. We are saying no to Finance Bill 2023 and 2024, and even the one that will come in 2025 if he survives. Another thing is they have captured certain institutions within the state. Just read the profile of David Ndii, a total yellow economist who worked with World Bank and IMF advisors. Look at Professor Ndungu. He is some illiterate bourgeois professor who cannot understand how economy works. So the whole thing, even when you're talking about imperialism, the poor professor is still talking about competition. He did not know that competition already ended. There is monopoly capital. When is this that, and I like the introduction when we are starting this session, that we must never overrate bourgeois education. So that is what I wanted to comment about IMF and World Bank.
And IMF and World Bank really, they ruined lives in Kenya in the 80s and the 90s with their structural adjustment programs. and the way public education was destroyed, public healthcare was destroyed in the name of neoliberalism. So all these private hospitals and all these private schools really came into being. They really established themselves in the 80s and the 90s. And this was also the time when Kenya was reeling in, it was a time during the HIV and AIDS pandemic with a ruined healthcare system. Literally the IMF and the World Bank should be tried for genocide. Sijui kama inawezekana, because all these people in the 80s and the 90s who have lost their jobs, they don't have money, we are facing a HIV/AIDS pandemic, our public healthcare system has been destroyed, children are being left orphaned, hakuna free education, a whole generation was lost. A whole generation was lost, and in fact they call it the lost decade or something, right? Yeah, they call it the lost decade, and this was all the IMF and the World Bank doing. And the US controls the IMF. I believe they have veto powers. They have veto powers over the IMF. They get to decide who gets what. They get to decide, how we are going to give you this loan, and this is what you're going to do with it. You are going to defund public schools, and then you're going to bring a program or some funny. They just come up with some funny program where, if you pay 500 shillings per term, then your child will be able to take this 500 and keep it for you, and then maybe ukimaliza Form 7 or Form 8, and we live in a country where police are shooting us, tuko na food insecurity, unajua je mtoto wako atafika huko. But like IMF and World Bank, they encourage neoliberalism policies in Kenya. A lot of our parents and grandparents were retrenched. During this last decade, many of our parents lost our jobs. They were not able to go to college. And it's the same thing we are seeing now, where HELB, they're trying to do funny things with HELB, making university education very expensive for us, and encouraging us to go to TVET schools to learn skills, and I have no problem with that. But it's very questionable how the ruling class don't want us to pursue higher education while they take their children to universities abroad. And it's just IMF and World Bank, venye nimesema, they should actually be tried for, I don't know what the word is, sijui kama ni genocide ama ni nini, but these people should be hanged. And I'm really proud of the working class in Kenya. I'm really proud of the 70% of us who are saying enough is enough. We are no longer going to have the 2020s as the lost decade.
Kaska's talking about the 90s, right? How that era went to waste. We saw them, the IMF giving conditions for them to, first of all, defund the healthcare system, whereby we were told that the government will only be taking care of, I think, drugs or something, and then you have to pay for medication. We saw them starting to do that with the university education in that era, whereby university was free. Like, there is a generation of Kinandi who went to university totally free, would go to school for free, and then afterwards would graduate and get a government job. But right now we're seeing that generation that went to university for free telling us to pay 260,000 shillings a semester. So I wanted to connect that era that the IMF brought so many conditionalities of them trying to privatize industries in the 90s, which led to many entrenchments. And also right now we saw that when this government came into place, I think the first few months that they got into place, they were calling, they changed the privatization bill, and they started calling for the privatization of so many institutions that employ so many of us. So I wanted to connect those two eras, and why are we seeing that making a comeback right now?
So the easy answer for that is neoliberalism. I don't have a definition for that right now. Please use Google. I will plug, this is where I'll put a cheeky plug for the podcast, my podcast. Me and my friend Wacera, who's also here, we have the same name. We delve into the whole idea of development. So we start from colonization, we go to imperialism and neoliberalism. So we connect all of those dots. So if you have time, please go sit down and listen to it, because you learn a lot. When we've talked about the IMF and World Bank, you mentioned how America has veto power. So as you mentioned before, the IMF and World Bank came after World War II, when the developed world was in shambles. Yeah, when the white people up north, well, not even up north, let me stop saying up, because even that whole hierarchy thing of the global north and global south is a mental thing of creating hierarchies. So people in Europe had messed up their country. In fact, they were taking bodies as there's so many Africans, so many of our grandparents went to fight for them in Burma, went to fight for them I don't know where. So Europe is in shambles, and so they need to rebuild, and so they rebuild. And when they do rebuild, they create these Bretton Woods institutions, which is now the IMF, the World Bank. They had different names before, and also the United Nations, which goes back to what Booker was saying about soft power. If there is something that is soft power in this world, it is the UN. Munaonangati, oh, they're here for peace, for this, for that. Guys, oh my God. I'm of the opinion that the UN shouldn't be on our soil if we as Kenyans don't get majority of the jobs and the senior jobs. But the reality is, the Nairobi United Nations station is one of the most fought for by other UN agencies across the world because of the benefits that come with living here in Kenya, working for that UN. We all know people who live in the UN, first of all, no, not blue place, they're red. UNEP is the United Nations Environmental Program. It has its headquarters in Kenya. The UNEP. Yes, Wangari Maathai came from this country. In fact, we are benefiting from her policies now in terms of the environment. But you want to tell me our president is going and selling off land in Kilifi for carbon credits and that blue economy nonsense, when the UNEP headquarters is in our backyard? Those are the things we need to be thinking about. That is a soft power that's there. We should be holding those institutions accountable for creating ecocide. Now we can't plant food on those lands. We don't have water, access to clean water. Our water is contaminated. We don't have access to the fisheries and the fish and everything that's there. Our biodiversity is being destroyed. So yes, as you were saying, the IMF, the World Bank, and these other institutions need to be held accountable because they have been responsible for genocide and ecocide. Through policies, they don't go and shoot up people, but our people die. Our lands are dying because of these policies. So we need, you know, the way we've been seeing with the LSK, how they've been just filing lawsuits like that to all of these politicians. We should also go and petition these people in their own court of justice. Because if you go on the ground and you ask a woman or a man who has his piece of land how the UNEP has helped them, they'll tell you nothing. Even our own grandparents will tell you nothing. As far as we know, the environment is still being destroyed. In the Congo Basin, they're still cutting down trees. When you go to Kakamega Forest, they're still cutting down trees. When you go to the Mau Forest, where the Ogiek and the Sengwe communities, indigenous communities, are being pushed out. Indigenous communities that have the knowledge and the skills to know how to protect that land, that are the lungs of our country. That's why we have clean air. That's why we have access to the biodiversity that at the same time they want to sell to the rest of the world for tourism. You know, like the contradictions of, I usually call them the contradictions of empire. So yes, just to reaffirm what you said, they are responsible for ecocide and genocide, and we should hold them accountable. I forgot what you asked. Oh, on education. So I actually had a tweet, a quote for that, for the education bit, which comes again from Walter Rodney. So I am a fan of Walter Rodney, and this is from the book How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. And he basically is talking about education in this, and he says, starting from a racist position, they, so the colonial powers, asserted that offering education to Africans was like throwing pearls before swine. Some of the most violent expressions of racism were directed against educated Africans. So, first of all, in the colonial regime, education for Africans was a no thing. In fact, the locals had to organize themselves to educate. I don't know if you guys are familiar, but there's the Karinga schools that were created in central Kenya by the Kikuyu. That's how they educated their children. And I hope I'm not wrong, but I think that's how Jomo Kenyatta learned. I hope I'm not wrong. Please don't quote me on that. But yeah. So education is one of the tools that is important to help us understand how all of these structures work and to dismantle them. However, at the same time, and this is a contradiction of colonialism, education creates these people who are intellectuals who go forward and push the agenda of these institutions. For example, David Ndii. If you look at the president of the World Bank, she's a Nigerian woman right now. This woman, if you look at her educational track record, she went to international schools in Nigeria, British schools, so she's learning the British way. She went to freaking Oxford. And I'm not saying Oxford is not a good school, but it trains you to become an intellectual comprador for them. I have met people who went to school in Oxford, and it's either you're on the right side of history, or you become extremely radicalized. There's no in between. But that's the reality. That's what education does. The education system prepares you to go and make policies that will kill your own people, that will kill your own children. For example, with David D, with the Nigerian woman who's the president of the World Bank. Still, Africa has one of the highest illiteracy rates in the world. But then, yeah, you're going to celebrate because, oh, there's a black woman who's president of the World Bank. Be for real, man. Like, come on, you know? And then we get pacified by representation politics, being told, oh, there's a black woman, there's a black man doing this, and that person is killing you and your children and your children's children. And you just hear, yeah, they're the same skin color as me, it's fine. We need to wake up. We need to start reading between the lines and seeing what I said before from the Frantz Fanon quote. The colonial system is a system of terror. It does not value life. It does not recognize your humanity. Don't cozy up to it because, yeah.
Also, shameless plug, you've mentioned Walter Rodney so many times. Mi na fellow tuko na podcast ya Walter Rodney, mwende msikie. Inaitwa The Myth of Development.
On education, what I just wanted to say that education for what? There can be education for a national project, and also there is education to serve capital. Those are two levels of education. And we know the popular ideas that we have are capitalist ideas. That is why, as you know, like redfish, we go against the wave. Every day we do our propaganda work to counter the capitalist logic, which is much more popular even in the learning institution. In terms of education, in the capitalist system, education is a product, the teacher is the seller, and the knowledge is, you know, what they sell to you. So the teacher calls you the client. Actually, the university you're in calls the students the client, and the clients bring some money. So it's education only for profits. And also, the content of what we learn in our education. Are we learning the right content to advance our national project, or we are learning only the content to serve? For example, if you look at the most ridiculous one, when they were introducing the CBC learning project, which is basically to prepare you as a tool for, to serve imperialist interests in our country, look at the professors that were there. So you see the British professors, the United States professors are the ones that are actually putting an advisory role in the CBC project. So, and then also on cultural levels, what is French Cultural Center doing here? What are they doing? Because all our best artists, actually, if you see, we have a good poet, we have a good singer, good dancer, all of them are appropriated by the French Cultural Center, and they put a fund to actually gear that content towards serving the status quo, and they remove its revolutionary content, and it becomes just some song. You know, so that is what I wanted to comment around education, and it is important for us to organize popular education, revolutionary education, to run out the studies, to run with the study circles, to rectify, to help us actually rectify the bourgeois miseducation. In fact, I don't consider universities like Harvard, like learning institutions. Those are induction rooms. Those are where you go to be brainwashed completely to serve only the interest of the capital. There is nothing to be proud about in those. Why do they try to pay a lot of money for you in terms of scholarship only to be brainwashed to serve their interests? So if we look at many economists that have devastated even the Latin American countries, you will find most of them were trained in the universities in the Western countries, and they were very lethal in terms of devastating those economies. So for us, we say, if you're pursuing any education project, be read. That means if I'm an engineer or a philosopher, then my education should serve the majority of the poor people. If you're a doctor, but you're only treating rich people to get money, then we don't need you. If you're an engineer and only, you're only doing your engineering to earn money to feed the grid of 2 of your family members and yourself, then, like you will say, just fuck off, we don't need you. So, the education must be education for the majority and not for minority. In fact, what is happening now is that the President Ruto administration has rolled out a policy to only commodify our education project and make sure that only those who can afford can have access to the education, while himself, he actually benefited through the National Education Project. This is the criminal we are dealing with that we need to deal with before the end of the week.
So we'll go to question and comment section. Aya, tuone mko na mikono. Sawa. Mko wengi, masani machache. Tutaanza hapa tukienda. Keep your questions short.
No comments.
Okay, this is not a comment, but it is a question. So my question is, while we are having this discussion, we are talking about the role of the oppressed. We are talking about the role of the institutions. We are talking about the role of the government. But we are completely leaving out the role of the people in the Western countries. The role of Europeans, the role of Americans, and my concern is this. If you look at right now, there is a lot of struggle to see who is going to become the global champion of producing probably electric cars. But what we are not asking ourselves is, while they are doing that, the message they are selling to their people is we are going to create jobs, we are going to compete country X or country Y. But there are certain other underlying factors, like where are the raw materials for probably the battery which is going to be in that car is going to come from, under what condition is it going to come from. Then sometimes they try to blindfold us with probably one thing and then try to create a solution to it. I think what they like talking about so much is child labor, and then they try to have NGOs who are going to probably address that, to probably hide the main thing is that you are extracting our raw materials, you are using them for your own population, probably to give them jobs, and then where that raw material is coming from, you don't care about those people. Why are we not talking about the role of the American people in probably perpetuating what we are experiencing in Africa today?
Yeah, so I just want to appreciate the opening note. I've never thought about the role of global citizens, and it was something that we were really taught in Isaac. And the sentiments that have been shared here have really shaped the core of my whole existence, being a finance professional. Just thinking about the role of institutions like the ICC and how people have been, that time when Ruto was massacring all of us and people were snitching to ICC. So if we're against global institutions, who are we reporting to? Who is holding people? Yeah, what is the end game if we are trying to dissolve all of them? And if that's the case, if we know black women would enter these roles of black men would do so, and they end up pushing this agenda. So how can we change that? Should I not, as a finance professional, aim to work for the IMF? God forbid, I chose never to work for IMF and Safaricom, but yeah.
Mine is a shorter question, which is to say that everyone had said they have a podcast. Could they say the name again?
Thanks. Thanks for showing solidarity. First, before niko na swali mbili quick, but nitastart kusema Ruto must go and fuck the entire political class. Niko na swali mbili, nitakuwa quick. So swali ya kwanza, Uchali amevaa hii hati ya Che Guevara, nimesoma jina yake. Napenda hiyo hati. Nilisikia ukiongea kuhusu land expropriation without compensation. So swali yangu ya kwanza ni juu Mugabe ali do the same, akakuwa under embargo and sanctions, naweza penda uongelee hiyo part. Alafu swali yangu ya pili ni hii discussion yote ina boil down to in class war between us the proletariat and them the bourgeois. So understanding yangu ni politicians kaki na Ruto au si the end game au ni puppets na tuna direct anga yetu. So hawa kina IMF au ma big shots hizo ma corporations tutadeal nao aje juu tuna direct anga yetu to the political class wenye ni puppets wao. Tutadil na ma capitalist aje hizi ma corporates tutadilaje nazo ndo tuko free.
Hi everyone. I have 2 comments and 2 questions. Number 1, white people need to stop using Africa to self-actualize and native land. Yeah. They need to stop using our lands to come here to feel something when they are ruined everywhere where they are from. From the time when the Pilgrims went to the Native American lands, they were using that place to self-actualize and they needed to fix shit at home. Point 1. The second thing is that I think we also need to address generational rifts within this struggle. Sometimes I find it very difficult. I mean, you see, the oppressive forces don't respect whether you're 50 or you're, now my age. So I find it really difficult to kind of include my mom or people that I respect who are much older than me in my struggle. So I'm trying to figure out how to do that. I think that's my second thought. It's almost a question. The first question is, what are the imperialist imports as far as white feminism is concerned? Because jana niliona Kimberly Crenshaw amesimama na sijui what's that? Yes, and I almost threw out my hair because I was so disappointed. So that's another thing. I feel like white feminism has really infiltrated our countries right now, and I think we need to talk about that. The final thing, now connecting to the intergenerational struggle, I have never known, Wacera and me go way back, so our schooling system was very anti-African history. So I have really never known half the things I've heard about African history. So I think one of my questions is, how do we reprocess the collective memory? Me always knew the Mau Mau fought for our freedom. And I was like, great, beautiful. And then now I'm hearing they're fighting for something else. So I don't know how we can reprocess our collective memory. Thanks so much.
Mtajibu haraka and then Wairimu atatuambia kama tuko na more time or not.
So I'll start with that one. The last question about the repairing the historical memory. So the reality is all of us, our knowledge and our understanding of ourselves is in serious disrepair. That's why reparations is a thing. Reparations isn't just about the material reality, but also our mental and spiritual reality as Africans. Because the colonial project destroyed us spiritually, emotionally, socially, every single tenet of our existence. So it starts by us reclaiming that. I really do recommend that people please read Walter Rodney's book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, because he explains different ways of doing that. Same as Rush of the Earth by Frantz Fanon. The thing is, Frantz Fanon was a what's that word? No, a doctor for the mind. Psychiatrist. He was a psychiatrist. So he understood the brain, and he uses a psychiatrist perspective to explain the colonial project and what you need to do as an African. Mind you, he was an African from the Caribbean. As an African, to repair yourself. So please, if you can't read his books, you will learn. So there's Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon, and then there's also Black Skin, White Masks. Those are like the first two introductory ones. Then you can just look him up on Google and find more. All of us, we need to be, when you're tumana na finance bill, kuchambua vitu, we need to learn how to do that. Okay, so yeah, to answer your question. So one brilliant example I can give is that podcast of yours, The Myth of Development. That one, it's like a six-part series. Guys, the way they...
That's funny, what we can do is if you follow until every part, we'll do a reading list
of all of that, yeah.
Everything, because I think there's so much here, and then...
Yeah, so that's one way of repairing it. I'll just leave you to answer the feminist question.
Yes, to answer the feminist question, I agree with you 100%. There's a lot of imperialist imperialist feminist imports in Kenya, and I wrote an article on Martha Karua and representation, and how we were supposed to be happy that hey, she's gonna be the first female deputy president, but then she was being backed by Uhuru Kenyatta, and we all know how 2013 to 2023 were almost the lost years of Kenya, this imperialist puppet. And Martha Karua also has a very checkered history. So representation for representation's sake isn't gonna cut it. Kamala Harris is a war criminal. Kamala Harris is, she serves the empire first. She's an American empire water holder before she's a woman. She is no feminist icon. All of them. So Kimberly Crenshaw, another thing about Kimberly Crenshaw is that like she tried to reduce, she really tried to avoid speaking about class and reduce everything to intersectionality. But like, mbona hautaki kusema class? And so yeah, here in Nairobi, there's a lot of women empowerment. We are still on women empowerment. Feminism is a dirty word, huku Kenya. And for good reason, because the most visible faces of what is referred to as feminism in Kenya are bourgeois women who are shattering the glass ceiling, but who is nani anafagia hizo glasses zinaanguka huku chini? Sisi. They serve capitalism. They will talk about wanting a seat at the table, but hatutaki your table, we want to break your table. They will, they will talk about wanting to be empowered at work, but then also paying their domestic workers 4,000 shillings a month. So there's a lot of like bourgeois, the way feminism, the way feminism in Kenya, the way the representations we have are capitalist, imperialist. We are told, Christina Sijui is the head of IMF, anakuja Kenya. How many feminists want to go to Villa Rosa Kempinski, kukunywa chai na kumuuliza career? And this is the woman who is serving an institution that destroyed your grandparents' life, that is destroyed your parents' life, that is going to destroy wewe na the future of your children. Kama hata tutapata watoto na venye kunaenda. So like, yes, I do agree there's a lot of imperialist feminism in Kenya, and fuck Kamala Harris, fuck all... Yes, fuck Esther Passaris, and fuck all of them. I don't... If Millie Odhiambo wakes up tomorrow and stops being a bad girl and starts serving imperialism, then fuck her too.
It's getting a bit hot. Yeah, so I wanted to make a comment that will help me to answer the majority of the questions, is that as long as we are living in a class society, then the primary contradiction is class, and any other contradictions we relate it to class and no other. So this will help us to understand a few questions. For example, there are comrades that have raised up here that what is the role of the American population, the European population, in terms of advancing imperialism against the countries of the global South? My comment would be that the United States working class are actually not indeed our enemies. The European working class are actually not indeed our enemies, because they are actually being oppressed by a minority of the dominant class in those respective countries. And that is why we bring the element of internationalism and solidarity. That the best solidarity that the United States workers can give to the countries of the global South is to make sure that their government never knows peace in their own countries. So it's important to bring out that clear that when we are talking about the United States imperialism, we are talking about the dominance class, we are talking about the organized criminals under the Joe Biden, and in terms of horizontal solidarity, we appeal for the solidarity of the working class, the entire global working class, to be in solidarity with our struggles here in Kenya to advancing to the defeat of the current ruling class here. Now, in terms of international institutions, these are institutions that have been captured. For example, even the international law. But what has been proven these 2 weeks is there is a limit of law. That the law is only law when it serves the majority of the people. It's only a law when it serves the majority of the people. But if it serves the minority, then the people can reject that law. For example, every time we go to the streets, we always send notification. This time that law was sterile. There is no head of security forces that came and said, we are going to prosecute the Kenyan people because they did not give us a notice. Then we told them the notice was on TikTok, the notice was on Facebook. That is how they became so helpless. And that also comes to constitutionality, because we cannot restrict our struggle only within the constitution. Remember, there was a colonial constitution. Now we had the neo-colonial constitution. So at any given time, I think the golden rule should be that all the actions must serve the common good of the Kenyan people. So if the law is not serving the common good of the Kenyan people, then it's time to change it. Our attitude towards the ICC, of course ICC is an imperialist outfit. Of course, the courts that we have here are bourgeois courts, because they only serve, at least by and large, the rich minority in our country. When you have a land conflict in this country and you are poor, even the cost of filing the fee is a problem. But if you have a land issue and you are from the property class, then you can access justice. But that does not prevent us from taking cases in the bourgeois court. Because one of the issues where we have to take the cases is to dramatize the failure of such a system. So even ICC, when people appeal to take President Ruto to ICC, we know it is an imperialist court, but we also want to dramatize that its failures is to support the imperialist puppets here. And then on land expropriation without compensation, this is non-negotiable. Non-negotiable. In fact, the blood that has been flowing in the streets since independence has been the blood of the poor people. There is going to be a time that there will be blood, but it will not be the poor people. It will be the rich man's blood that will be flowing in the streets. Maybe the ruling class will call it white terror, or maybe they will call it red terror. But we'll say we are returning red terror with white terror. That is non-negotiable. Why we are saying that? Because land is at the core of our struggle. They can threaten us with sanctions. They can threaten us with everything they want to threaten us with. But at the very end of it, we must, in fact, why we appeal for Pan-Africanism is that when we are defeating United States imperialism imposition of sanctions against countries of the global South, if you are to be united to reject those sanctions, then we will succeed more. If Kenya was united with Zimbabwe, South Africa, Eritrea, because now the biggest culprits that the United States have imposed sanctions against is Eritrea, now Zimbabwe, they're even lifting it. So we need a collective effort of the African people and the global, the countries of the global south to challenge these punitive cohesive measures that is being imposed by the United States dominance class, particularly sanctions and economic cohesive measures. And then how to deal with capitalism. Capitalism is an organized crime. They are organized criminals. So we have to organize also to defeat their organization. You cannot defeat capitalists without getting organized. In fact, for the young people, you either join an organization or form one. Because if you are an individual without an organization, then you're just a liberal. Because you cannot defeat, because for now, President Ruto does not have the popular support of the people. Why is he our president? Because he has organized violence. The role of the state is organized violence to protect the bourgeoisie. The last bastion of the bourgeoisie is the military. So long as we are not getting organized and to have a central coordination against these organized criminals, they will continue to put a high wall in their overthrow. For example, now the young people went to the street in a very powerful way that defeated the propaganda of dividing the Kenyan people. For example, they will not have come to say that my Kalenjin brothers and sisters, the Luos are actually on the streets, or the Kisis are on the streets. Because the young people indeed were tribeless in the street. And they were saying that we have no tribes because tribes have been used for a tool of division to only perpetuate the ruling class in this country. So to that extent, we are tribeless for a moment. So the rich did not know how to deal with us. In the sense, there was no ethnic mobilization that could help that demobilization process. Even when we say we are partyless, all we mean that the parties that we have entrusted in this country for political power has indeed auctioned us. So we don't need such political parties. And the leaders that compromise with the criminals, we do not need. And that is why yesterday I was very proud when it was trending that Baba pia fanya nini asalimiwe. Yeah. Because the ruling class is using division. Normally, if it is not tribe, then it is gender, then it is age, it is religion, so or class issue. But the main, when we are advancing our revolutionary agenda, we must put class as the primary contradiction to other contradiction. On age differences, I really like her comment. She was saying, how do I bring mom to my fold or dad to my fold? But this brings out the dialectical relationship between one generation to the other. That the discussion, I have to finish. Okay. Maybe I'll make one moment on feminism, then I give you back the mic. Yeah, so on age differences, what I was saying that there is the miracle between the relationship between, we say green and gray. The green has the energy, has new ideas. The gray has the old experience. So there is no difference between the young and the old joining in the war against imperialism or the ruling class. In fact, this division that is being, the Generation Z is actually advancing the total interest of the population and not one age gap over the other. So this needs to be clarified. And then on feminism, of course, there are two types of feminism that we have to agree with. There are people who interpret feminism only based on private parts, you know, like they look at you as a woman and your structures as a woman. But also, a revolutionary must also be a feminist because we live in a patriarchal society. Because patriarchy gives certain advantages of men over men in the capitalist system. But we also have to take cognizance that the total freedom of female or male or any other gender is only true after the defeat of capitalism. So feminism must also be able to advance the project of advancing a progressive and a revolutionary change. And I like the class perspective that my two esteemed comrades has given us on in terms of feminism. Because, of course, President Ruto's wife is our enemy, and she is a woman. We are looking for him, When we are saying that after the revolution, the hangman will be busy, we will not spare him or spare her. So the question is, the bourgeois feminists actually are a danger to the progress of women, because they use women to actually articulate the rights of the bourgeois women themselves. So when they are fighting, let us mobilize the women to own land, they don't mean entire women to own land. They mean a few rich women to own land. So that is why we must be very clear in advancing our faith in terms of advancing our faith on feminism. And to be clear, I think all revolutionaries need to be feminists. Yes.
Asanteni sana. Thank you so much for the questions. We could have taken more, but hii hall si yetu na wenye hall wamesema tunafaa kwa tuna wrap up. So back to you, April.
Thank you. Yeah, tunafukuza. Thank you all so much for being here in person today. As I mentioned before, the recording will be published in various places. If you follow us on Twitter and on Instagram at UntilEveryPod, UNTILEverypod. That's probably how you found this place, so you know it. Then we'll also put a reading list. We'll ask all of our speakers, and perhaps, maybe even comments. Like if you have other questions, maybe we can find a way to air them. But one note that I want to leave you on, especially in this moment after the sort of the fizz and the fury of the last few weeks, there's a lot of questions about what's next. Even some people are saying, it looks like the movement has fizzled out simply because people are not in the streets every day. And as we've learned, being in the streets is only one part of this, right? At a certain point, we have to organize. Our enemies are organized. Our enemies know no borders. So too must we. But I also want to leave us on this other note, which is why we continue to fight, or what this fight will continue to look like now, in a time when I don't think there is a template or there is a roadmap for what this movement is going to become. There's this beautiful quote by Rosa Luxemburg that I can't remember exactly. She was a German communist who was killed by the Nazis, but she had this quote that went like, "The final victory will come as a result of many, many, many little losses." And that is the beautiful alchemy or magic of revolution, is that many losses can somehow turn into a victory. Just look at Kenya. Every freedom that we enjoy today, and we've spent today talking about all the freedoms which you don't yet have, but every freedom that was enjoyed was worked out by a string, as Felix said, a series of people who fought even when they knew they would lose. Beginning with the Nandi, for example, taking out the spikes of the railroad, sharpening them and using them as spears against the British who had guns. This was Chief Koitala Arap Samoy, the original Samoy, let's be clear, the OG. And of course, did he win? No, militarily they lost. What about the Mau Mau? The state of emergency ended in 1958. When was the Kenyan flag raised? Years later. They were driven into the forest. They were fighting with homemade weapons, and some routed from Asia, against a world power, the largest empire in the world, that had just come from winning World War II, that were bombing like jet bombers into the forest, and you have these weapons. And then you ask rationally, why do you fight? That's not the question they ask themselves. Or rather, the answer was not because we think we will win. The answer was because it is the right thing to do. And because we would rather, as Dedan Kimathi says, die on my feet than live on my knees. It is not a question of, will we likely see victory before we die? Probably not. And so what I really have been encouraged by is that even, and I appreciate Comrade Booker bringing in the tragedy in the beginning of the comrades that we've lost, people's whose lives who were stolen. I won't say even that they lost their lives. Their lives were stolen, they were killed, they were murdered, and they continue to be now, one by one picked off, and we must remain vigilant. That in itself is a total tragedy, and I think we must hold on to the sanctity of life in these sacrifices that have been made. I see a lot of pessimism. I see a lot of people saying, oh, it's over, it's fizzled out, now we're making compromises. But the people who I see who are most encouraged are those who have been fighting the fight for the longest time, those in social justice centers in Nairobi's informal settlements who have been for years battling police brutality and economic empowerment and land rights, all of these things, they are encouraged by what they see. Or what about queer and feminist organizers, people who are fighting a fight that they almost know in their bones they will not see the victory of, and yet they are fighting for some of the most basic freedoms, which is to not have my personhood be defined by anyone else but myself. That is total freedom. The people who are encouraged by this include those among us who were part of the December 12th movement, who were part of Kenya, who were alive during that time. They are encouraged by this. And so if you look around you and you see who is optimistic about this moment, and you see these people, and you see the people before us, then that is the magic of revolution, is that losses, fighting losing battles, even when we know we will lose, somehow in the future that becomes freedom. So with that, thank you for coming. Viva. Keith, do you have something to add?
I have one announcement.
Maybe we can give to Keith. Since I feel like
there are several consultations taking place on the question that what next. Like for example, tomorrow the Law Society of Kenya has organized another forum at Fungamano there. Again, it's trying to reconsolidate the movement and reconsolidate the gains in the streets. On 19th again, there will be another forum at the Professional Center, organized by Social Justice Center for the Communist Party of Kenya. Again, to reconsolidate the gains in the street and to make the next offensive be a red card for President. Yeah.
Hi everyone. So I just like to thank you all for coming today. So the event was held in partnership with Until Everyone is Free, Qwani and Bunge la Mayut. So I think April has already talked about Until Everyone is Free, so I'll just talk about Qwani and Bunge la Mayut. So Qwani is basically a community of youth who've come together, a community of creatives who've come together to promote their art. So we have writers, we have musicians, we have artists, we have filmmakers and all kinds of stuff. So today we'll be selling our book. This Qwani 2 is a collection of pieces written by different writers in poems, short stories, essays and reviews and stuff. So it will be sold at the back. It goes for 50 shillings. And then Until Everyone is Free is also selling their pins. So there's one for 150 and there's another one for 100 bob. They're also for sale at the back. And then as for Bunge la Mayut is basically a civic platform for the youth to come and engage each other on such issues affecting the nation. So every Thursday at 7:30 p.m. we usually have a Twitter space where we now discuss all the bills that have been fronted at the Senate and at the National Assembly. So even 30 minutes from now we'll be having one. I don't know whether you guys will be able to join. And then next Friday, we'll still be here for a physical session. We'll have a bunge. Our bunges are usually take the model of a parliament whereby you have those on the side of the government and those opposition, and then we come up with a topic which we debate, and we usually believe that that's the best way to learn about such stuff. So previously we've had sessions on the doctors' strike, we had a session on the finance bill. So for this one, we'll be having next Friday we'll have a session on the state of the nation. So we'll be meeting here. We usually advise some to come and take the side of the government because the motion can only move forward when they have some devil's advocates. So if some of you can believe they can argue well, we'd welcome you. So yeah, next Friday from 4 to 7 p.m. we'll be here again. And you can follow us on Twitter at Bunge la Mayut. You can also follow Qwani just as Qwani, and you can also follow Until Every Pod.
Yeah, the podcast is called Until Everyone is Free, but our social media handles is Until Every Pod.
Yeah, and in case you will post any photo, please tag the three of us and we'll be happy to repost.
And Tuesday we are on the streets.